Right friends, welcome back to editorial discussion. Today I have taken 5 issues from the Hindu. First one is with regard to HIV AIDS bill, which provides a solid base for further empowerment. And if you look at the facts, here India runs the second largest antiretroviral therapy program. I will explain you a little while from now what is antiretroviral therapy, ART, as well as CD4 count. Government spends lot of money, and if you look at the salient points, here the most important is it guarantees equal rights in medical treatment, admission to educational institutions and jobs. Basic point is no discrimination for AIDS patients. This lists various grounds on which discrimination against HIV positive persons and those living with them is prohibited. So, if anyone is violating this, he will be penalized. There will be civil and criminal proceedings. At the same time, it provides a legislative framework with regard to the response to HIV in India. So, it is the first national HIV law in South Asia. If you look further, it applies to both the public as well as private offices, that is one part. Second one is access to insurance, that is second important aspects, and it bans unfair treatment of people living with HIV. So, 3-4 important aspects I will tell you. One is no unfair treatment in public places like restaurants, shops, hotels. That means AIDS patients should not be discriminated. If they are discriminated, then they can be punished. Second point is equal rights in public and private places, and no discrimination in educational institutions and giving jobs. So, these are the protections inbuilt in the AIDS bill, which was passed recently by the parliament. And at the same time, insurance also, access to insurance, most important aspect, and freedom to movement, right. And you may have a doubt, what is meant by antiretroviral therapy? Quite often we hear about ART. ART is basically combination of drugs. This is combination of antiretroviral drugs to suppress HIV virus. To suppress HIV virus. If HIV virus is there, what happens? It will result in reduction in CD4 count. Please understand carefully, because of HIV virus, it ultimately results in reduction in CD4 count. So, now ART therapy is basically to suppress the HIV virus, so as CD4 count will not reduce. The practice is in some countries, when CD4 count is reduced, then only ART is started, but World Health Organization recommends ART is for all the people with HIV as soon as possible after diagnosis without referring to CD4 count. You may have a pertinent doubt, what is meant by CD4 count? CD4 are nothing but these are one type of white blood cells. Our body may face several infections like from virus, from bacteria. Our body faces several infections day in and day out, and the inside this CD4 cells protect our body from infections. If CD4 cells count is less, what happens? We may catch several infections. So, as to prevent infections, this CD4 count is required. Normal human beings CD4 count is 500 cells per mm cube to 1600 cells per mm cube. And in the persons affected by HIV, this CD4 count reduces below 500, and here very low count of less than 200 cells per mm cube is one of the ways to determine whether a person living with HIV has progressed to the stage 3 infection. So, because of HIV, CD4 cells will be reduced, when CD4 cells are reduced, our immune system will not work and we will be susceptible for several infections from viruses and bacteria. Right. So, this is all about ART therapy and CD4 count. And if you look at critical appraisal, here right to treatment is not incorporated. One drawback or flaw is right to treatment is not incorporated, but it makes the states to provide the treatment as far as possible. Right to treatment is not there, but states should make all the efforts to provide access to the best possible treatment as possible. And basically, discrimination in jobs as well as education as well as healthcare services will not be there from now onwards, or you can say the bill basically protected the patients from discrimination, and access to insurance is one important aspect. Then another point is, its bill assumed significance in view of national commitment because of we have to ensure sustainable development goals by 2030, and elimination of AIDS is one of the goals of this sustainable development goals. So, this bill strengthens our mission to ensure sustainable development goals by 2030. And what needs to be done? Here, rapid scaling up of interventions to prevent new cases, that is the need of the hour, and free universal treatment is to be offered. Free universal treatment is to be offered, and that is critical to reduce the incidence of these infections. Then, publicly funded insurance can easily bring the subset of care seekers in overall risk pool. Then the next one is, government should provide opportunities for education, skill building and employment for the HIV patients. Then necessary guidelines are to be framed. Now basically law is framed, but the biggest problem is its implementation, and stringent laws must be framed for violation, and these guidelines, law is already framed, I am talking about guidelines. Necessary guidelines are to be framed for the implementation of the law with a stringent framework in a reasonable time frame. Next one is, states must appoint ombudsmen. There may be several complaints, violations may be there. So, to look at the complaints, this ombudsman mechanism must be strengthened, and at the same time state rules should prescribe reasonable time limit for inquiring into complaints. So, this is what needs to be done. So, periodic reports on compliance will exert pressure on states to meet the obligations. So, here law is framed and it is to be implemented in true letter and spirit. Basic aspects are universal treatment, offering free universal treatment, and everyone should be brought under ART irrespective of CD4 count. Third important aspect is no discrimination must be ensured 100%. Fourth one is ombudsman must be established in states to look into the violations, and all these aspects must be done within the specified time frame that is as per this editorial. Right friends, look at the next one. Mr. Erdogan, he is becoming authoritative day by day, and with the referendum he will become further authoritative. This is Turkey. I told you several times, please look at the geography aspects of various Sea of Marmara, Bosphorus Strait, then Dardanelles Strait, Black Sea, Aegean Sea, and it is situated in two peninsulas, or you can say it is forming part of Anatolian Peninsula, and at the same time Balkan Peninsula. So, this Bosphorus Strait, this separates Europe with Asia. Then if you look at Turkey at a glance, and major portion is in Anatolia Peninsula and minor portion is Balkan Peninsula, and here it is early member of NATO, and it is asking for European Union membership for quite some time. Now it may not ask for membership, because of the changed circumstances. Then capital is Ankara, largest city is Istanbul, and the currency is Turkish lira, and largest minority group is Kurds. That is one important aspect to note. And there is demand for greater Kurdistan, and it spans across 4 countries. Please understand, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran. So, the demand for greater Kurdistan spans across 4 countries. This is one important aspect. In Turkey's population, maybe around 10% population are Kurds, and in the Muslims predominantly they are Sunni Muslim, right. So, now Turkey, other important aspects, joining EU membership is its dream, but several EU members objected to it, and at present it may not be interested to join EU. And stability in Turkey is very important for stability in West Asia, and in recent times Recep Tayyip Erdogan is becoming more and more authoritative and propagating Islamist policies, and it is strategically located in continents of Europe and Asia and exercises control, or you can say over entry to Black Sea. This country is quite critical. Then it is a parliamentary republic till now, and now with the referendum it is going to convert into presidential republic. And news report, the referendum 51% voted for presidential republic. Till now it is parliamentary republic, it will now shift to presidential republic with wide ranging powers or overwhelming powers. So, president will become too much powerful in future. So, what will happen with this S vote? I have given, the country will be transformed from parliamentary democracy to a presidential republic. It will abolish the post of prime minister. Then another important aspect is transfer of prime minister's power will go to president, and one important aspect is president will appoint members to the judiciary. President will be the authority to appoint members to the judiciary, and the interesting point here is how the independence of the judiciary will be ensured. Then the next point is it removes the power on the president maintaining party affiliation. President can maintain party affiliation, then control of the political party over the state institutions may take place. The judiciary and the security forces will be under the party's control. So, you can say it will become authoritative presidency. And now it is already into problems because of civil war in adjacent Syria, and now it is transforming to, in fact, presidential republic with overwhelming powers, and authoritative tendencies may also creep in. And another important aspect is what will happen to the minority Kurds, which constitute around 10% of the population, and whether their interests will be taken care of or not. That is the $1,000,000 question. Look into the next one. Why the Jayalalitha case matters? Here the issue pertains to the abatement of the judgment. The abatement because of the death of Jayalalitha. So, here the author is strongly pointing out that the arguments were completed long back, and finally the judgment was reserved. Meanwhile, Jayalalitha died in the month of December, and subsequently Supreme Court abated the judgment, or you can say Supreme Court abated this particular case in Jayalalitha, or you can say the case against Jayalalitha is a 20-year-old disproportionate assets. These are facts and figures. It is under the Prevention of Corruption Act. This is when a public servant amasses wealth by illegal means. This particular case is when the public servant amasses wealth by illegal means. It is not merely to punish the offender, not only punishing the offender, but also to see that the offender or their legal representatives do not enjoy such illegally acquired assets. So, let us see the case. Jayalalitha passed away on December 5, 2016. Then all the hearings pertaining to Jayalalitha were concluded much prior to that. So, all the hearings concluded in June 2016. After 6 months, Jayalalitha expired, and subsequently after 2 months, Supreme Court delivered the verdict and it upheld the guilty of the 3 accused. The 3 accused were found guilty, prison sentence and penalties were imposed, and the Supreme Court left Jayalalitha. The court felt that Jayalalitha was no more and Jayalalitha's case stands abated. So, this is the judgment of Supreme Court. So, on March 21, Karnataka state filed a review petition against the abatement of Jayalalitha conviction. The case pertaining to Jayalalitha shifted to Karnataka some time back. That is why Karnataka came into picture. Karnataka High Court gave the judgment, and against Karnataka High Court judgment, Supreme Court went to Supreme Court, Karnataka went to Supreme Court and Supreme Court found 3 of them guilty, but Supreme Court felt that as Jayalalitha is no more, the case against her stands abated. So, it is nullified, you can say. The case will not be there because of death of Jayalalitha. Supreme Court also dismissed the April 5 review petition. This is not a political issue. I am discussing this because some legal aspects are involved. When a person dies, the case stands abated or not. When a person dies, case stands abated or not. So, this issue we are discussing, this is not a political issue, it is some legal issue, that is why I am discussing this. Then issues pertaining deeper insight. So, issues requiring deeper insight, the author strongly feels it sets a bad precedent. It sets a bad precedent, and the property illegally earned by the public representatives can be enjoyed by the legal heirs. So, in such circumstances, if the case stands abated, then legal heirs are free to enjoy that property. So, that is why it sets the bad precedent. That means, in future the courts can quote Supreme Court judgment and abate similar cases when persons die. Second one is, let us take the case when public servant, after amassing hundreds of crores illegally, choose to commit suicide. Let us take a hypothetical case. Public servant amassed thousands of crores, then he committed suicide. Under those circumstances, can the legal heirs enjoy that property? Can the government allow the legal heirs enjoy that property by abating the case? So, hence it is a retrograde step towards the march for eradication of corruption from public life. Look at the third one. It is almost settled law that there is no hiatus. What is the meaning of hiatus? Hiatus means break or gap. It is a settled law that there is no gap between the date of conclusion of arguments and the date on which the judgment is delivered. In this case, 8 months gap is there. So, any event occurring between the date of judgment and conclusion of the arguments should not have an effect on the judgment. Here you see the arguments concluded in June 2016. Jayalalitha expired in December 16 and February 2017 Supreme Court delivered the judgment. So, arguments were concluded in June 2016. That's why the judgment should not take into consideration the expiry of the accused Jayalalitha, which happened in December 2016. Right. So, this case violates this principle, and at the same time Order 22 Rule 6 of the Code of Civil Procedure states that there will be no abatement of an appeal if the death is after the judgment is reserved. So, in this particular case, death occurred after the judgment is reserved. Right. Then the next issue. Supreme Court itself has constitutionally applied this rule in civil appeals. In several civil appeals, Supreme Court upheld this principle, stating that there is no abatement of appeal where the death is after the judgment was reserved. In this case, June judgment was reserved, that means arguments concluded, but judgment was delivered in February 2017. In between, in December 2016, Jayalalitha's death occurred. So, this is wrong as per the established principles in view of the author. As the Supreme Court confirmed no abatement in such civil cases, there can be no principle or authority with a different view in case of criminal appeals. Right? Supreme Court rules also do not provide for abatement of any criminal appeal. So, whether it is a civil or a criminal, there should not be any abatement once the arguments concluded, irrespective of the circumstances, after the completion of the arguments and when the judgment is reserved. That is the strong felt, in fact, opinion of the author. Next. When the judgment was pronounced on February 14, the Supreme Court stated that the case against Jayalalitha had abated without any discussion on the questions involved. And in fact, no opportunity was given to the parties to address the argument on the question. Then next point is the legal implications arising out of death of the accused after the judgment is reserved was not debated, but the dismissal was recorded based on erroneous view of law. Right. So, Karnataka, by filing the review petition, feels that important question of law has been erroneously decided. So, that review petition was also dismissed by the Supreme Court, and now Karnataka cannot do anything, and Karnataka, by filing the review petition, feels that important question of law has been erroneously decided. Right. So, here the author says there are some important aspects pertaining to law, and it sets a bad precedent which will be quoted by the future judgments by other courts. Right. Look into the next issue, the great climate churn. This is with regard to climate change. With regard to climate change, you can expect 1 or 2 questions in this year's mains, and this issue is basically the icy glaciers of Arctic and Antarctic are being melting away. Right. So, here look at the following facts. The earth has enjoyed a more or less stable temperature for the past 10,000 years as per the author, and prior to that there were several ice ages and periods of warmer temperatures which are known as interglacials. You may have a doubt what is meant by interglacial. Interglacial is the period of warmer temperature. It may run into thousands of years, that is different story. So, the period of warmer temperatures is known as interglacial period. And if you go back 5 million years to 2.6 million years ago, global sea levels were 30 meters higher than today. Around 5 million years to 2 million years ago, global sea levels were close to 30 meters higher than that existing today. The Antarctic ice sheet is 14 million square kilometers in area, 14 million square kilometers, and it is holding large amount of frozen fresh water. if all the ice over the Antarctic were to melt, let us assume the entire ice melted in Antarctica, right, then the sea levels will rise by about 60 meters. If the entire ice melts away today, then sea levels will rise by 60 meters. Similarly, in Arctic, if the entire ice melts away, then global sea levels will rise by about 7 meters, right. So, then look at the following facts. In fact, temperatures in northern Greenland of Arctic region, they are increasing by 3 degrees to 6 degrees centigrade above normal at present. Then surface melt has doubled Greenland's contribution to sea level rise. Surface melting of this Greenland doubled during the last 20 years. In the last few months in Antarctica, cracks along the Larsen Sea shelf is widening. This shelf, this cracks along this Larsen Sea shelf is widening. In fact, this Larsen A and B collapsed in 1995 and 2002. So, here the cracks along this shelf are widening, and ultimately what happens? Ice shelves lose mass by breaking off or otherwise carving of some of the portions and also by melting. So, if the gap widens, some part of ice shelf will break away and ultimately melting will take place. So, this is what is evident from this article. Then this is Larsen Sea ice shelf in Antarctica. This Larsen Sea ice shelf is going to break. The gap is widening, and if it breaks, then what happens? It will melt away. Already for Larsen A, Larsen B have broken. So, Larsen Sea ice shelf is on the verge of breaking away. And what are the reasons? What are the reasons for this extreme conditions? Global warming. Global warming is the main reason, and if you look at the fact, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide levels, if you go back to pre-industrial levels, they were 280 parts per million, 280 ppm. Now they crossed 400 ppm. Because of lot of industrialization, because of burning of fossil fuels, this carbon dioxide content increased from 280 ppm to 400 ppm. And this is the highest during the past 4 lakh years. Then another point is soot and the dust carried by air from various places. At the same time, bacteria as well as algal pigments, we have discussed about algal bloom. So, please recollect what we have discussed. This bacteria and algal pigments in the melt water and any other pigments in the glacier can reduce the reflection of light. When the reflection of sunlight is reduced, what happens? When the reflection because of pollutants, the reflection because of pollutants is reduced, reflection of sunlight is reduced, what happens? More and more sunlight will be absorbed. When more and more sunlight is absorbed, more and more heat energy will melt the ice much faster. Please understand, this point is very, very important. So, this process consequently increases ice melt and then absorbs more solar radiation and thus accelerating a cyclical process. Then the meltdown water flows into deep shafts inside the glaciers. It flows into deep shafts, then speed up the flow of the glacier. Then modeling the glacier melt is very, very complex. How much time it will totally melt down, it is very difficult to predict because of complexity of the factors. One is the temperatures of water, ocean currents and other factors, and these things are not clearly understood by the scientists. So, global warming, pollution levels, then the concentration of algal and bacterial pigments in water, then soot and dust carried by air from various places, and when the pollutants in the water increases, then it absorbs more sunlight and it accelerates the melting down of the icy glaciers, and carbon dioxide levels are increasing nowadays, right. So, these are the reasons for the melting down of glaciers. What are the consequences? Consequences are several large and densely populated cities. Please understand, large and densely populated cities are situated on the coastal and low-lying deltas, and they will be submerged. And if you look at the world as a whole, several important cities are situated adjacent to the coast, and substantial population reside on the coastal deltas, and they will be badly affected. And India's east coast is extremely vulnerable because of the low-lying area, and which will lead to flooding, saltwater intrusion, loss of land and livelihoods towards the east coast of our country, and towards the west coast what happens? Coastal erosion and flooding from sea level rise may take place. And what to do? The most important aspect is coastal regulation zone is the need of the hour. Please implement coastal regulator zone regulations, coastal regulation zone regulations. Then protecting vulnerable districts and most vulnerable communities which rely on the ecosystem and the sea for their livelihoods are the areas that need strengthening. Then regional agreements related to the refugees from the areas affected is the need of the hour, and if not today, this problem may arise in future. So, regional planning for extreme events such as a sea level rise would be important for our country. Then this article is about chemical weapons. This is the use of chemical weapons in Syria. The article says, if the chemical weapons goes into the hands of non-state actors like Taliban, like Islamic State, what will happen to the world? So, this is the question posed by this article. Chemical weapons, these are weapons of mass destruction. Mustard gas, sarin, tabun, VX agent, these are the examples. They can be categorized primarily into three types: blister agents, blood agents, nerve agents. Already 1997 convention is there. 1997 convention was signed by around 190 countries, and the goal is free of chemical weapons. This chemical weapons convention, this organization for the prohibition of chemical weapons, this is headquartered in The Hague. There are four main goals for that convention: destroying all the chemical weapons under international verification. Then second point is monitoring chemical industry to prevent re-emergence of new weapons. There should not be scope for re-emergence of new weapons, and at the same time protection to state parties against chemical threats. Then the next important point is international cooperation for implementing the convention. So, these four are the main goals of this prohibition of chemical weapons convention. But in spite of the convention, nowadays what happens is chemical weapons are being used sometime back by North Korea, now by Syria, right. So, salient points: chemical weapons convention was concluded in 1997. Subsequently, during 2004 to 2009, US soldiers detonated thousands of chemical weapons dangerously under the open skies in Iraq. Subsequently, between 2004 and 9, US soldiers detonated thousands of chemical weapons dangerously under open skies, and subsequently Iraq acceded to the chemical weapons convention in 2009. In 2013 what happened? Syria used chemical weapons in a place called Ghouta, and subsequently Syria acceded to the Chemical Weapons Convention. I think after 2013 attack, Syria was forced to sign the Chemical Weapons Convention. Later on, these chemical weapons were destroyed also by taking away from Syria. This final consignment of chemicals were removed in June 2014 to the destruction destinations, and it is not clear how Syria is using these weapons now, because within a year of the removal in 2014, Syria used these weapons on one place, and now there are news reports that Syria used these weapons on Khan Sheikhoun, a town in the northern part of Syria. Right. So, the important point to note is this country Syria acceded to this Chemical Weapons Convention, but how it is keeping a pile of chemical weapons, it is not understood. And report of OPCW, if you look at the report of Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, it says as of 2016, 90% of the world's declared stockpile of chemical agents, 90% of the world's declared stockpile of chemical agents have been verifiably destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes. Whether they are destroyed or converted to peaceful purposes, and now the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says around 98% of the world is now free from exposure to chemical arms. So, the legal ban that has been in place for 2 decades is a significant advance, no doubt about it, but the biggest worry is some of them might have gone into the hands of non-state actors like Islamic State. Some of these chemical weapons might have gone into the hands of this non-state actors like terrorist organizations, radical organizations like Islamic State, right. So, the biggest worry is the proliferation of these chemical weapons, and chemical weapons in the hands of non-state actors like terrorist organizations is the biggest worry for the world. Right friends, with this let us conclude editorial discussion. We discussed some important aspects today. So, have a nice day. Thank you.